Hi YouTube, today we're going to be building a entry-level PC for gaming, but also with a brilliant upgrade path to make it completely future-proof. Okay, so as featured in the previous video, if you're subscribed to the channel, if you're not, please hit subscribe and go back and check this motherboard out on the previous video. Here we have the Gigabyte B450M DS3H micro ATX motherboard, obviously for the Ryzen platform socket AM4. Going into this motherboard is going to be a Ryzen 5 2400G. So that is a 4-core 8-thread processor with built-in Vega graphics. As I've said, this is entry level. And then because the motherboard has 4 slots for DDR, what we've got here is we've got 2 sticks of 2400 MHz ballistics RAM in grey. Then we've got 2 2400 MHz 4GB sticks here from Corsair. And because I'm slightly OCD, what I'm going to be doing is putting the grey sticks in the grey slots and the black sticks in the black slots. So without further ado, let's start to get this motherboard assembled. Okay, so first of all, to get our package ready, and the package is what normally consists of the processor, RAM and motherboard. What we're going to do is get the CPU straight into the motherboard. That way we are protecting the pins on the processor, and if it was the other way around on Intel, obviously we'd be protecting the pins inside the motherboard socket. Okay, so here we have the CPU, and on the one corner we have a little gold triangle, and that normally lines up to the top left corner there. And all we have to do is, obviously I've lifted the arm up on the socket. Just make sure it's sat in there correctly, give it a little wiggle, make sure everything's okay, it's fully down, and then close the lever. So that is the CPU installed. Next, what we need to do is get a screwdriver and remove these 4 screws and remove this clamp, because the CPU cooler screws straight into the backplate and does not utilize these. Okay, so that is the CPU clamps removed. Next, what we're going to need to do is apply some thermal paste to the top of the CPU, because as this is a used CPU, obviously the previous originally factory installed thermal grease has been removed, so we need to apply some more. And in this case I'm using Arctic MX4 thermal compound. This is what I always use. Okay, so across about 3/4 of the diagonal width of the processor, and just put an X, a nice, not too thick, not too thin X. People sometimes argue about whether you should spread it out across the complete top of the CPU or just put a pea-sized dot in the middle. This is the way I've always done it, and it works every time. How you apply it is entirely up to you. Okay, so with thermal paste in place, we're going to just lower the CPU cooler down on top of it, just aligning the screws with the back plate. And then what we do is we just start to screw in diagonally and make sure they're all seated. I'm just going to rotate the motherboard. Now all you need to do is just start the thread off a couple of turns and then just go around and do the other 2 opposite corners. And you don't need to do it tight at all, just keep going until it stops and then leave it there. There's enough tension on the springs on the CPU cooler to keep the heatsink in place. Okay, so we're back to the first 2 again now, all the way down, all the way down. Okay, so that's brilliant. And then what we'll do is we'll just bring the power cable for the fan and we'll just tuck it in behind the screws that hold the heatsink down, so it's out the way and not flapping around. Just a little bit of cable management there. And then we'll just plug it straight into the CPU fan header there. And there we go, that is done. Okay, so next I did mention the memory. We'll open the clips each side. They just move back, and we'll install the grey ballistics RAM into the grey slots. And then we'll install the black Corsair RAM into the black slots. And there we go, that is our package ready to install into our case. Okay, so the case that we're going to be building in is this one here. This is from Aerocool. This is the Bolt Mini RGB. This here is the RGB strip, which runs off SATA power. On the side of the case, we do have a tempered glass side panel. On the top, we do have a removable dust filter. And pre-installed inside, which I've already done, we do have a 700 watt Aerocool Cylon modular power supply. Okay, so if I take the side panel off, and then we can start getting the components inside the computer. Okay, so looking inside the case, we can see that there are some of the motherboard standoffs already pre-installed. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We do need this one here and this one here as well. So out of the little packet of screws that comes with the case, I'll grab one. And also they have included a standoff installation tool. So that is a cross-headed or Phillips on one side and then the hexagonal socket on the other side. So that just makes it much more easier to install. And using a screwdriver, you're not going to put too much force on it and strip the threads as if you would using a socket or a pair of pliers. Okay, so the last thing that a lot of people forget when they're building a PC is obviously the I/O shield. That pushes into place from the inside of the case, and the best way to do this is just push in from each corner just to get it located, and then just double check down the length to make sure you've got that all fully in place. Sometimes these pop in really easy and sometimes they can be a right pain in the bum, and this one's proven to be a pain in the bum. Okay, so with the I/O shield fitted firmly in place, what we'll do is we'll now lower the motherboard down and aim to put the ports into the I/O shield first, and then lower the rest of the motherboard down onto the standoffs. And the reason we do this is so that you don't scratch the back of the motherboard with the standoffs, which, like I've said before, can be easier said than done, but that's now in. And all the screw holes from the standoffs are now aligned up with the holes in the motherboard. So what I'll do is I'll now put all the screws in to secure the motherboard in place. Okay, so after quite a lot of fettling and a few swear words that were deployed, we do now have the motherboard in. We have all the power cables. What I had to do is on this side here where the main ATX power supply goes in, I did have to loosen off the motherboard retention screws just so I could lift the motherboard slightly, as there wasn't enough room in the cable management hole there for the cables to come through. So I just had to slacken that off, pop them through, and then tighten it back down. But yeah, everything's all connected. The front panel header, USB, USB 3, and all the power, reset, hard drive and power LED buttons and LEDs are connected. Okay, so if we just give it a test boot, let's make sure the power is on. There we go, so the CPU fan is turning, there is a LED strip that's actually built into the motherboard. I'll show you that in just a second. There we go, the BIOS has come up, and yeah, everything is working. If I just click this onto easy mode, there we go. So it does say that it is the Ryzen 5 2400G, and it has 16 GB of RAM detected, all four there. So yeah, that's great, that's brilliant, that's all working. Before I stop the camera rolling for this section, I'll just move it over and show you the LED illumination that is on the motherboard. This part does not change colour, this is just a little LED illumination thing that's built onto the motherboard. There is a 4-pin connector on the motherboard to connect up the RGB strips, or an RGB CPU cooler if you wish to do so. But in this instance, obviously we're keeping everything simple, very basic, and with a budget in mind. Okay folks, so here's the final product. Everything's all set up, all illuminated, tempered glass side panel back on. I've taken the protective covering off the inside of the glass. I've left the outside one on just for the moment to protect it. This will be going up for sale at some point. As you can see, we've got Windows 10 fully installed on the 240 gig Kingston SSD. The LED on the front of the case is working perfectly, and I'll just give a quick demonstration. There is a button on the top, and if you press it, I believe there's 13 different modes. So that's the standard rainbow mode. Then we've got, just cycling through, individual colours. We've got another rainbow mode. It's a bit quicker, and that's got white in. Then we've got pulsating colours. That just keeps going through each different colour. And we've got kind of like a Knight Rider theme going on there. Obviously just in the one direction. And then we've just got the static colours. And then we're back to the rainbow. So I'll leave it on the rainbow, which is the default. Yeah, so this is a really good system. As I've previously said, this is a Ryzen 3 2400G built-in graphics. We're using 16 gig of DDR4 RAM, and that RAM it says according to Windows 13.9 is available. Obviously it's using 2 gigs for the video part of the CPU. We have a 240 gig Kingston SSD in there as well. So yeah, I mean, it's a really good all-round, very basic system. You could play most games on low to medium settings, 1080p, without it getting you know, too laggy or the frames per second dropping. But like I've said as well, there's plenty of room for future upgradability. So we've got a motherboard that will support up to the 5000 series, the current generation of AMD CPUs. There are 4 DDR slots, so you could take 2 of the 2 sets of 4 out and put 2 8s in, which would give you then 24 gigabytes of RAM. And of course, because it's using the built-in graphics on the CPU, you can always drop a graphics card in there. We do have a 700 watt power supply in there, so that should cover the majority of all current available graphics cards. So obviously dropping that in there will disable the built-in APU, the graphics on the CPU. But on the flip side of that, you still will have a 4-core 8-thread CPU to drive all your games. So yeah, any of these parts here, if they're available on Amazon, there'll be a link in the description below if you wish to buy them at all. And obviously using those Amazon links does give me a very small kickback to obviously keep the channel supported. And as usual, thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, and share this video with everyone you know.